Hey, my name is Mike, and in this video, I want to talk about Hellfire Citadel. I want to give some basic reviews of each boss in the raid in general. As I'm recording this, I'm 1 out of 13 Mythic, and 13 out of 13 Normal and Heroic. I won't be talking about Mythic at all, and I'll mostly be talking about Heroic, though I will throw in some stuff about Normal as well. So first of all, when Hellfire Citadel was announced, I was stoked. I was only logging on to raid, and I actually hated doing Heroic BRF at that point. I only liked doing Mythic. And just the announcement of Hellfire Citadel made me want to log on all the time. I leveled up a vanilla character, I started doing some achievements, and the reason for that is because Hellfire Citadel is something I've wanted to raid since Burning Crusade. I remember when I first stepped into Hellfire Peninsula and I got to the Hellfire Citadel and I saw it and I was like, wow, this is an awesome raid. And it turned out to be 3 dungeons and 1 raid boss. So that was kind of a letdown, and when they finally announced it was coming as a raid, I was stoked. I could not believe it's finally happening. I was just really excited. But now that initial excitement has kind of died down, and I've done all 13 bosses in this raid plenty of times, I kind of just want to share my thoughts. So let's start with Hellfire Assault. On Normal, this fight legitimately just felt like trash for Iron Reaver. On Heroic, this actually caused maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours of wipes for my guild. This was mostly because we just had ad mismanagement. The one thing I do like about this fight is that the ad priority is constantly changing. Like sometimes the Berserker is priority, but then sometimes the Terror is, and sometimes the vehicles are, and I like that it changes like that. But overall, it's a very weak first boss. Ideally, you want the first boss of a raid to intrigue you for the rest of the raid, and this fight does not do that at all. The thing that sucks most about this fight is that you can't actually get it to go faster. I mean, you can be doing Normal at 730 item level, and it'll still take you as long as it normally takes you. So you kind of just sit there hating your life because this fight's awful. Moving on to the actual first boss of this raid, Iron Reaver, this is a very simple fight. This is pretty much raiding 101. Don't stand in fire, use some cooldowns for the pounding, don't stand in the way of anything bad, kill bombs, kill boss. But despite how simple it is, this still manages to be one of my favorite fights of this entire raid. On Normal, there wasn't really any major issues that I had with this fight. On Heroic, it was actually a lot more difficult. Specifically how the tank blows up. Like taunting the boss and moving out of the raid so you don't kill everyone was quite a bit of a learning experience. And the room that you fight Iron Reaver in is actually deceptively large. Because for this fight, you really want everyone to be pretty close to the boss, just in a circle around him. I would have actually preferred it if they just made Iron Reaver the first boss. Kormrok was the first boss on Normal that I actually experienced a little bit of trouble with. One thing I like about this fight is how you can actually choose which mechanics you deal with. So if you don't want to deal with the respawning explosive runes, you can instead do the moving hands. Or if you don't want the moving hands, you can do the 3 puddles for whatever reason. And it was actually really funny going from Normal to Heroic, because on Normal everyone stacked up pretty close, and then on Heroic we did that and we got 1 shot. Myself as a warrior, I really liked that I was able to go from 0 to hero from just blade storming on the hands. The moving hands though were kind of annoying because of the angle that you had to get dragged at. Like sometimes you think you're going to go to one pool, but then you're on the wrong angle by like 1%, and then you're going to get dragged to the other pool instead. Overall, this is a pretty forgettable fight, and it is a little bit tedious, but it's pretty good for a entry-level boss. As the 3rd or 4th boss, High Council was pathetically weak on both Normal and Heroic. On Normal, I think we actually face-pulled it and we killed it with no issues at all, and like half the people not knowing the strat. Even on Heroic, it didn't take us that long to do it. I think it was like 3 pulls or something like that. My guild progressed on this boss faster than we did the previous 3 bosses. I feel like there's hardly any mechanics actually for this fight at all to deal with. This fight just kind of reminds me of Iron Maidens and Blackrock Foundry, minus all the mechanics that made Iron Maidens kind of interesting. So because of that reason, I find this fight incredibly boring and I don't like it at all. The one thing I do like about this fight though is the 30% abilities from each boss last until the end of the fight. It adds a little bit of a challenge to an otherwise very easy boss. I mean, if they wanted to take out Hellfire Assault and even put this as the first boss, I wouldn't be opposed to it. The Visions phase on Kilrogg is pretty cool. I like the damage buff that you get from it because it's nice seeing 100k DPS, but I would have liked to seen the Visions actually be a little bit more expanded. Instead of just waves of ads, maybe like a small gauntlet that gets more powerful and they have to actually move through. The Corruption debuff from the Hulk would have been a cool mechanic if it actually mattered. I don't even think the healers need to get the aura at all if everything is done properly. I would have liked to seen that Corruption mechanic play a little bit of a bigger role in this fight. As a melee, I would have liked to seen a little bit more mechanics for this fight, because the range take care of the ads for the most part, and melee just worries about the terror and then any stray ads that range can't kill, and then the boss. Overall though, I'd say it's okay. Gorefiend is the first boss that was both a challenge on Normal and Heroic. Right off the bat, I love the way this boss looks and the room itself. This room actually reminds me of the room in Black Temple where you fight that boss with 3 faces, but overall I think this is a great fight because there's something for everyone to do, whether it's kiting, killing, or healing the ads, or running together for the link, or killing the boss. I'm a big fan of debuffs that will drop something on the ground, such as the Void Pool in this fight. The reason for that is because it's a quick check to see who's dumb. I also like the Feast of Souls phase a lot. Just like Kilrogg's Visions phase, it's nice to see everyone's DPS just skyrocket sometimes. I also like that Feast of Souls isn't just a strict burn phase. There's actually still a little bit of mechanics here. When my guild was progressing through this on Heroic, we actually found it best to have the melee's priority be the Essence, the Spirit, and then the boss. We found that we were dying too often when melee helped with the constructs for some reason, so we just made them not do it. Overall, I'd say this is one of the best fights in the entire raid, and it's also one of the most difficult, so good job Blizzard. The eye mechanic on Iskar Iskar is actually awesome, I think. It's not that great when people don't know how to pass it, whether it's through an add-on or manually clicking it off of them, but people being a little bit clueless isn't a fault for Blizzard. The thing that I think is really cool about this fight is that it's pretty simple, but it's just so easy to wipe on. And I like that there's almost a system that has to be created for who gets the eye and when. Like for example, in the last phase, my guild will toss it to anyone who still needs it that's affected by the wind, and then that person, if they can, will either interrupt the warden or they'll throw it to the tank to interrupt. Then that tank has to quickly pass it off to a healer for the bombs, and then they pass it off to the tank so they don't get that debuff, and the tank throws it back to someone else, and it's just really hectic when you try to plan it all out, but it's so much fun. And the other mechanics like the chakram and the fire, they're small little annoyances, but I think they really help add to the fun of this fight. This is actually the only fight that I saw videos of from the PTR, and I was like, I cannot wait to do this fight because it looks just so much fun, and it is. Socrethar is one of the very few fights whose tank mechanics is not swap on X stacks, which I think is great. On normal, this fight was pretty easy, but on heroic, there was some serious coordination that was needed. Progressing on this fight was actually really fun because we tried like 6 or more strats trying to get one that actually worked for us. And I like that because it felt like actual progression instead of just, hey, watch this video, okay, good, you got the strat, let's go. Now that this fight is on farm though, it kind of feels a little bit tedious. That might have something to do with the long trash beforehand. The fun of this fight definitely wears off after a while, which kind of sucks. It's still one of the cooler fights in this raid though. As a melee, Tyrant Valhari is probably the worst fight in existence. I understand why the hitbox is so small, but that does not mean I cannot still hate it. It's actually funny because as someone who used to AD strafe all the time during fights back in the day, this fight made me kind of laugh in phase 1. The healing aura in phase 2 is really sketchy just because everyone's health is going low, and I just by instinct I'm popping like rallying cry or my self healing. I'm like, oh, shouldn't have done that. When we were progressing through this fight, my guild actually found it best to sacrifice the person that had that purple circle right before we got into phase 3. We were finding that if we didn't sacrifice them, we were wiping because our health was so low and they would one-shot us. Once we started doing that, we had more people alive going into phase 3. The Font of Corruption stack in phase 2 is also very important. My guild had countless wipes in here trying to perfect the stacking, positioning of the bosses, ourselves, and watching our debuff timers. And this fight is kind of funny because the longer it goes on, the easier it gets. And the last phase is super easy, which is fine because you spent about 60% of the fight crying about how hard this fight is. I'm not entirely sure why I like Xhul so much, but I really like this fight. I like that you have to actually use the majority of the platform that you're given. I also like how in phase 3, the first 2 phases are mixed together in one phase. I also like that this fight is only as hectic as you let it be. If your ad control sucks, then you're gonna have a bad time. And I actually also found this fight harder on normal than I did in heroic. When this raid first came out, the annoying thing was that everyone seemed to be tunneling the boss. This especially sucked when the imps would spawn as you're moving sides and everyone would move sides, and then there's only me killing the imps on the other side. But besides that, the boss looks awesome, and this is another room that kind of reminds me of Black Temple for some reason. Fel Lord Zakuun as a near end boss on normal was just downright stupid. I one-shot this 7 times in a row, and the only reason I wiped on this once was because it was bugged. The first time my guild killed this on normal, I think the strat I told them was stand in the swirlies, don't stand near spikes, and touch all the purple shit. The fun thing was going into heroic thinking it would be pretty much the same thing, and then wiping over and over and over again because it wasn't at all. Positioning on heroic is insanely important. Similar to Socrethar, we actually tried many different strats with this fight on heroic. For some reason, we ended up settling on taking the boss to the door and having every pillar that we could spawn near the door spawn near the door. We had melee doing the soaks, and the range would be the Guardians of the Galaxy. This strat definitely has a lot to do with RNG, but we found more often than not, it won't give us a hassle. I like that on heroic, this actually feels like a boss. From a mechanical standpoint, I really like that one person can literally wipe the entire raid, but as a raider, I think that is the most stupid thing in the world. But it's good because everyone that's doing this boss will have to actually know what they're doing for this boss. Like my guild, we had countless wipes where we had someone not moving out for Seat of Corruption or not guarding a pillar. Overall, this is a pretty enjoyable fight despite the fact that it's still a wipe fest for my guild sometimes. Mannoroth kind of feels like Hellfire Assault to me. It's a lot of nothing going on and it just feels like it goes on forever. However, unlike Assault, you can actually make this fight go faster by getting more gear. Overall, this is just a very boring fight. All the mechanics happen at such a slow rate that it's pretty much a snooze fest. I would have loved to have seen some of the mechanics overlapping, like the Fear and Shadow Force going out at the same time, or even Shadow Force and Fel Seeker. I do like the Fear mechanic though, that people have to actually chase these people to split the damage or they die. Fel Seeker is a pointless mechanic all by itself. It's just something about it makes it so irrelevant to this entire fight. The black circles on the ground are very annoying because they're kind of hard to see, but they also don't do that much damage. I would have liked to seen those actually been an important part of this fight, so moving from them was actually a requirement. The ads in general were just annoying. Phase 1 just feels completely unnecessary and a waste of time. The thing that really bugs me about this fight is that you go like 60% on this boss doing the same mechanics that don't do anything really, and then at 40% he still has all the same mechanics, they just do a little bit extra. But I won't lie, some of the stuff that happens in that last phase makes it a little bit more hectic and more fun. Mainly though, it's just the Fear ability with that pool that spawns based on how many people stand in it. That's really cool, and I would have liked to have seen something similar done to all the other mechanics, because I mean Shadow Force going from 3 people to everyone in the raid, boring. Fel Seeker, I don't even know what that does in the last phase. It's more damage, I think. Black circles spawn more frequently and they still do no damage. The only thing I like about this fight is every time in Discord when the fear goes out, the gays are coming, the gays are coming. Pugging Archimonde on normal was a little bit ridiculous. The easiest relation is just to say that it kind of felt like Archimonde and LFR feels right now. There's so many different strats and so many different fails. As seems to be a reoccurring theme for this, I kind of left normal thinking Archimonde wasn't gonna be that tough on heroic, and then I did heroic and I was like, oh my god, GG. Like on heroic, everything has to be perfect. Chain breaking has to be called out, it has to be perfect timing, chaos has to be done correctly, spreading out 8 yards so only one person gets knocked up into the sky, which by the way was probably the reason for about 100 of my wipes on Archimonde. Switching to the adds was sometimes difficult and they didn't go down as fast as they should have been. I did like that the amount of fire that you dealt with throughout this fight was dependent on how good your DPS was at switching to the actual fire producer. I also like that each phase has a mini bonus ability near the end of it. On heroic, phase 1 and 2 were mostly focused on mastering add priority. Phase 3 is usually where most of the progression will be needed. That phase alone had like 3 or 4 of its own strats. My guild found it best to send in 3 groups to go to kill the add and another banish, and then the 4th group would be the sacrifice. The living shadows are super important on heroic. I know the first time that we killed this fight on heroic, the DPS on those was super low. It was kind of insane because on normal they weren't really that big of a deal, but on heroic it's just super critical that they die. And I like the last phase because of how hectic it is. Within the span of like 10 seconds you have like demonic feedback, chains, infernals, another banish, and chaos all happening. Hands down, the hardest part of this entire fight is just staying alive through the infernals and all the other mechanics. I don't even think I can provide meaningful tips for helping you progress to heroic Archimonde, because literally the only tip I have is know the mechanics perfectly, time everything perfectly, and have defensive cooldowns all the time, and watch everything. But as the last boss of Warlords, he's definitely unexpected. I don't think anyone really thought that was going to happen. But as the last boss of an expansion, I think he's incredibly challenging and a very good final foe. I think overall I would rate Hellfire Citadel my least favorite raid of the 3. It's an okay raid, but it doesn't really do anything for me in the long haul. But that was my review of Hellfire Citadel and all of its bosses. Feel free to leave your opinions down below. I'd love to know what you guys think. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.